when the five reigning kings of late-night television, Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Fallon, Jimmy Kimmel, Seth Meyers, and John Oliver, gathered for the historic Strike Force 5 podcast. During the 2023 writers' strike, millions of listeners tuned in for the chaos, the camaraderie, and the comedy. The premise was simple. Five of the most powerful men in media, trapped in a room together, trying to out-joke each other while raising money for their out-of-work staffs. It was a masterclass in ego and wit. But if you listened closely between the punchlines, you could hear the ghosts of the women who actually run those households. Behind every monologue about inflation or political gaffes is a spouse who has navigated everything from septic shock on a soundstage to international border crossings involving federal agents. These are not just the first ladies of late night. They are combat medics, human rights lawyers, executive producers, and secret novelists. They are the ones who keep the trains running on time while their husbands pretend to be helpless for a living. The Strike Force 5 podcast raised millions for crew members, but it never once interviewed the people who actually keep those five men functional. This is the untold story of the wives behind the microphones, the women who built the men America laughs with every night. Stephen Colbert is known for his razor-sharp satire and emotional depth, qualities honed by the tragic loss of his father and two older brothers, Peter and Paul, in the crash of Eastern Airlines Flight 212 in Charlotte, North Carolina, on September 11, 1974. Stephen was only 10 years old. That specific date, 9/11, carried tragedy for him long before it carried that name for the rest of America. What the world sees as political fire is, for Stephen, the controlled burn of a lifetime of grief. Enter Evelyn, Evie, McGee Colbert. The couple met at the Spoleto Festival in Charleston in 1990. At the time, Evie was a successful actress and singer, having performed in everything from regional theater to national commercials. She was not starstruck by the young Second City comedian who would one day inherit David Letterman's desk. Instead, she was drawn to something far more revealing. She watched Stephen enter a theater with his mother, Lorna, clutching his arm. Evie later told a close friend that her exact thought was, this man loves his mother in a way that is not needy, but protective. That is a man who knows loss. That single observation is why she agreed to a first date. It tells you everything about why their marriage has lasted over 3 decades. Here's something most fans of The Late Show do not actually know. During the pandemic shutdown of 2020, while other hosts struggled to film from home, Evie did not just sit quietly while her famous husband went stir-crazy. She picked up a camera, learned lighting ratios, and became his entire one-woman production team. She filmed The Late Show from inside their Charleston living room while simultaneously homeschooling their 3 children, Meline, Peter, and John. Stephen said at the Emmys that year, with his voice cracking, "The only good thing that came out of the pandemic is that she finally got to be part of the show." He meant it literally. For 20 years, Evie had stayed backstage. For one brief moment, America saw her in frame. But Evie's most critical intervention came in December of 2023. Stephen tried to push through 2 back-to-back tapings despite severe abdominal pain. He thought it was the flu. He thought he could power through. Evie, watching from the control room monitor, noticed the pallor of his skin and the way he was holding his right side during a commercial break. She called their driver, Pablo, and issued a quiet, absolute order: skip the house. Go straight to the emergency room. Do not tell Stephen the first made this call. She refused to let her husband overrule her decision because she had already Googled his symptoms while he was telling a monologue joke about Trump. By the time they reached the hospital, his appendix had already ruptured. He was sliding into sepsis. The surgeon told the family that another 2 hours would have meant a very different conversation. Stephen later admitted on national radio, "Evie kind of saved my life that night." He paused, then corrected himself. "No, she did save my life." The two of them released a family cookbook in 2023 called Does This Taste Funny? It is full of low-country recipes passed down from Evie's late mother, Patty, dishes like she crab soup and Benen wafers. Evie never wanted Hollywood. She wanted a real family kitchen, a vegetable garden, and a husband who came home for dinner. That is exactly what she built around the most famous man in late night. She is the reason Stephen Colbert learned to laugh openly again after 1974. She is the anchor. Jimmy Fallon makes a living being the silliest guy on television. He giggles through sketches, breaks character during impressions, and seems like he is permanently playing hooky from adulthood. But the road that brought him to his two daughters, Winnie and Frances, was anything but funny. Behind the Tonight Show desk sits a man whose wife had to walk him through 5 years of fertility heartbreak before they ever held a baby of their own. Her name is Nancy Juvonen, and she is a powerhouse. She co-founded Flower Films alongside Drew Barrymore in 1995, producing classics like Never Been Kissed and Charlie's Angels. They first met on the set of Saturday Night Live the night Drew was hosting. Nancy snuck quietly into rehearsal, hoping to stay invisible in the back, wearing a hoodie and no makeup. Jimmy spotted her almost instantly. He called out her name across the entire studio and welcomed her like an old friend he already knew. Nancy has said that she fell in love with him later, while watching him play with the producer's young son on the set of the romantic comedy Fever Pitch. Jimmy dropped to the floor and became a toddler himself. Nancy turned to a friend and whispered, "That man is going to be a father someday. He already is one." But fatherhood did not come easily. For 5 years, Nancy and Jimmy tried everything: hormone shots, IVF cycles, surrogacy consultations, miscarriages that braved in private hotel rooms so the tabloids would not find out. Jimmy has joked openly that he tried sleeping upside down for hours and putting magnets inside his underwear during the long IVF stretch. Those are punchlines for the monologue. The truth is that Nancy tracked every injection, every blood draw, every false hope. She has been more direct about it. She said, "We spent 5 years really deciding not to give up." That single quote has comforted thousands of couples walking the same lonely road today. They turned to gestational surrogates in Dallas, Texas. Both Winnie and Frances were born from their own embryos carried by women that Jimmy still calls his real-life angels. The process broke them down emotionally over and over again. What makes their story land so hard is how privately they kept all of it from the public eye. They did not tell anyone Nancy was using a surrogate. They wanted Winnie's arrival to feel like a happy surprise instead of a press release. Nancy protected that secret like a state secret, because she knew that the internet would dissect her fertility, her age, her choices. She refused to give them the satisfaction. He still surprises Nancy with romantic gestures whenever he can. One year for her birthday, he hired a real-life barbershop quartet to walk into a sushi restaurant in New York and sing "Close to You" while she was mid-bite of a tuna roll. Another time, he recreated their first kiss hotel room in London, down to the Harry Nilsson album playing on a vintage turntable and an episode of Taxi flickering on an old television. Nancy has called that first kiss the best one she has ever had in her entire life. She is the architect of patience. She is the reason Jimmy Fallon still giggles, because she gave him something to giggle about after 5 years of silence. Jimmy Kimmel's transformation from the crude co-host of The Man Show to America's most heartfelt late-night advocate for healthcare is the most dramatic evolution in the genre. That evolution has a name: Molly McNearney. She walked into the offices of Jimmy Kimmel Live in 2004 as a writer's assistant. She climbed all the way to head writer alongside Jimmy himself. Today she is the executive producer of the entire show. She is also the mother of his 2 youngest children, Jane and Billy. The very first time Molly stepped into Jimmy's office, he barely even looked up at her from his desk. Her boss mentioned that she competed in triathlons during her free time. Jimmy responded by telling her that triathlons were really stupid and a complete waste of human time. That was her honest first impression of the man she would eventually marry. She has admitted she did not think of him romantically for years afterward, mostly because he was her direct boss, and dating your boss is already complicated enough without him also being on television every single weeknight. But then came April 2017. Their son Billy was born, and a sharp nurse at Cedars-Sinai noticed that the newborn baby looked purple. She heard a heart murmur. 3 days later, Billy underwent his first open-heart surgery to repair a rare condition called tetralogy of Fallon, with pulmonary atresia. He has had 3 open-heart surgeries since that very first one. Jimmy delivered a tearful 13-minute opening monologue about Billy's surgery that almost hit 14 million views on YouTube. He told the entire country, "If your baby is going to die, and it doesn't have to, then it shouldn't matter how much money you make." Here's what most viewers will never know. Molly was on maternity leave the day he delivered it. She was sitting in their living room, breastfeeding their newborn son with her own mother sitting beside her. Jimmy refused to send her the script draft beforehand. He knew she would try to edit out the emotion to make it cleaner for television. She sobbed through the entire monologue and could not believe the strength it took for her husband to share that story only 1 week after it actually happened. Molly later said that strangers were sending hate mail to their home and attacking them brutally on social media for politicizing their newborn son. She still believes Jimmy did it because of every other family they met inside that hospital who could not afford the same care. She helped him write that monologue word by word. She helped him write his Las Vegas shooting monologue too. Molly is the co-pilot of conscience. When Jimmy wants to prank Matt Damon or read mean tweets, it is Molly who vets the legal lines. When a joke crosses from funny to cruel, she is the one who says, "Cut it." She is the rare wife who sits in the writer's room, ensuring that the man she loves does not accidentally ruin his career with a joke that goes too far. She is his conscience, his hard drive, and his heart muscle all in one, and she refuses to take credit for any of it. Seth Meyers is known for A Closer Look, a segment where he dives deep into the absurdity of politics with a surgeon's precision. But at home, the absurdity is supplied by his wife, Alexi Ashe, a human rights attorney specializing in sex trafficking and asylum cases. While Seth jokes about being the ugliest of the late-night hosts, Alexi is quietly the most impressive person in any room she enters. The two of them first met at the wedding of Chris Kattan in Oakhurst, California, in June of 2008. The funny part is that Chris Kattan's own marriage fell completely apart in only 8 weeks. But that same weekend somehow created Seth and Alexi forever. They hit it off so quickly that by the second day of the wedding, other guests kept asking how long the two of them had been a couple already. He still waited 5 whole years before he finally proposed. When he did it in July of 2013, he tied her engagement ring inside a bow on the collar of their Italian greyhound named Frisbee. He waited patiently at home for her to come back through the door. Alexi was running late that afternoon, and Seth has shared that he kept staring at the dog and worrying it would actually eat the ring before she walked in. But the legend of Alexi Ashe was cemented with the birth of their second son, Axel. In 2018, Alexi went into labor so rapidly that the elevator in their Manhattan apartment building was deemed too slow. She delivered their son on the lobby floor. Seth, frozen in panic, handed the phone to the doorman while Alexi took command of the situation. She calmly instructed the 911 dispatcher on how to handle the umbilical cord. She checked the baby's breathing. She kept her own heart rate down through sheer force of will. Seth turned this story into a Netflix special called Lobby Baby, but he omits the most crucial detail: Alexi's professional training. As a lawyer who deals with crises of international magnitude, trafficking rings, asylum hearings, deportations, she was the only calm person in that lobby. While Seth was hyperventilating about the carpet stains, Alexi was saving their son's life. The real story behind Axel's middle name is even more meaningful. He was named Axel Strauss in direct honor of Alexi's grandparents, who actually met inside a hospital in Austria the day after they were freed from a concentration camp. That single detail alone tells you what kind of family legacy this couple carries forward. When their daughter Adelaide came along in September of 2021, the doorman in their building basically begged them not to repeat the lobby moment one more time. So Adelaide was born safely in the family bathtub at home, named after Seth's maternal grandmother. Alexi keeps Seth grounded in the reality of the law. While Seth jokes about political figures, Alexi is actually working with asylum seekers at the border. She refuses to appear on the show as a bit wife. She uses his platform to highlight legal aid charities and then returns to the courthouse. She is the moral compass who reminds Seth that the stakes of his jokes are real, because she deals with the real-life victims of political chaos every single day. If there is a Mount Rushmore of how did he land her stories in Hollywood, John Oliver's marriage to Kate Norley sits at the very top. John Oliver is a British satirist who talks about chicken farming and corporate loopholes on Last Week Tonight. Kate Norley is a former United States Army combat medic who served in Fallujah and Ramadi during the Iraq War with the 1st Cavalry Division. Their meet-cute is the stuff of spy novels. In 2008, during the Republican National Convention in St. Paul, Minnesota, John, then a correspondent for The Daily Show, accidentally wandered into a restricted security zone. He was a foreign national with a temporary work visa. Any kind of trouble with federal security could have shipped him back to England overnight. He was terrified. As security agents started closing in, a group of veterans from an organization called Vets for Freedom surrounded him. Leading the charge was Kate Norley. She had just finished a 16-month tour in Iraq. She was campaigning that week for veteran causes. She looked at this panicked British comedian with the curly hair and made a split-second decision. She physically pulled John and his crew into their group, surrounded them with her own body, and used her veteran status to bluff past the barricades. She saved his entire American career before they had ever exchanged names. John has told this story countless times since then, and he never forgets to mention that he owes his entire American career to a woman who had already saved actual lives inside a real war zone. They started dating not long after that convention week, and John has been refreshingly honest about how the gap in life experience hits him every single day. He told David Letterman directly that when he comes home from writing jokes for a comedy show, Kate's eyes roll back into her head, and she tells him to just shut up already. He said, "When you have actually been in a war, you have absolutely no time for the insecurities of a mid-range comedian. The secret life is what happened after the wedding." Kate suffers from PTSD. She has nightmares about Fallujah. She startles at loud noises, yet she is the one who manages John's anxiety. While John rages about corruption on Last Week Tonight, Kate is the silent editor in the viewing room who whispers, "That joke is too cruel," or "We need to stand by that segment, even if the network is scared." She is the reason John refuses to do both sides journalism when one side involves human rights abuses. She taught him that neutrality in the face of evil is not journalism, it is cowardice. Their first son, Hudson, was born prematurely in November of 2015, after a very difficult pregnancy that worried John deeply for months. Their second son arrived in 2018. In December of 2019, John finally became a United States citizen at the federal building in Lower Manhattan. He was so nervous that day that he forgot his own phone number during the official ceremony. Kate stood right beside him through the entire moment, holding his hand, whispering his address into his ear. If you watch Last Week Tonight closely, you will sometimes spot a small pin on John's lapel. That little pin is the badge of the 1st Cavalry Division. It belongs to Kate's old unit. He wears it proudly on national television because his entire career, his American citizenship, and his whole family all trace directly back to one chaotic moment when a combat medic decided to save a complete stranger from getting arrested at a political convention. The Strikeforce 5 podcast raised millions of dollars for out-of-work crew members. It was a celebration of male ego and comedic timing, 5 friends sitting in a room making each other laugh. But the true power of these 5 men is not their ratings or their Emmys or their podcast downloads. It is the resilience of the women they go home to. Evie Colbert is the emergency room they didn't know they needed. Nancy Fallon is the patience required for joy after 5 years of silence. Molly Kimmel is the strategic mind behind the activism, the one who vets the tears. Alexi Myers is the grounding force of reality, a lawyer who delivers babies on lobby floors. Kate Norley is the courage that stops the bleeding, a combat medic who has saved lives in Fallujah and in convention centers. These women do not want credit. They do not want a segment on the show or a podcast episode of their own. They want the dishes done. They want the kids in bed. They want their husbands to come home alive. They are the secret sauce of late night, the original, authentic, and uncredited source of the stability that allows America to laugh at the news every single night. Without them, the monologues would be just noise. With them, they become history. The Strike Force 5 entertained the world during a strike, but the wives behind them have been holding the line for decades, and that is the real story.